Day at Archway in East Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I'm here with my boy Devin Krongenberg and Andy Sweeten. And, well, it's July 20th. And I'm just going to hand you over to my boy.
I'm Christian McKibben, and Michele Peterson and Rondell Crier is behind me. Y'all want to come up, please?
Yeah. Thank you, Asia Johnson. Thank you, Christian McKibben, for making that announcement. We appreciate it.
Love you guys.
We love you guys. We appreciate y'all showing up. Life
Absolutely.
is 80% showing up to the ball game. Not necessarily around here, not necessarily whether you win or lose. It's how you play the game, right? So here we go. We're going to try to keep this podcast under an hour.
For the first time ever.
That's right. We have a visitor today. As Christian said, we have Rondell Crier from Studio Everything here talking to us today about anything and everything. And we would like, the way we do things here is we give people the opportunity to talk to about themselves and tell us their story. So Rondell, Andy Sweet is here, guru of everything. We've had about 4 of these podcasts under our belt.
5 or 6 now.
5 or 6 now. Feels like 50. Getting over the angst of talking into the microphone, getting in the box. We've got, as Asia said so eloquently, Devin Kronenberg of German descent. His dad will be so proud of that. He's got a very famous father who has toured the world designing wonderful buildings all over the world, really. Devin is a prodigy of his parents, and so we're going to let Rondell jump in here and tell us his story. Where are you from, Rondell? And just talk to us a little bit.
Well, I'm originally from New Orleans and born and raised. And I moved here to Chattanooga, Tennessee after Hurricane Katrina. And so, you know, I'm a local artist, and I've been engaged in art for most of my life. Since I was in 6th grade, I've been engaged in art. So art's has played a big role in my life, personally and professionally. And the work that I do out here on Glass Street is about mentorship and what we call now social artworks, which is something that's, I guess I've been working with that in that spectrum all my life because of a youth arts organization in New Orleans that I've been engaged with and started as a participant since I was 14. And so I kind of understand the perspective of the young people in this neighborhood from my own experience and how, you know, you could change your trajectory. And that's why I'm here on Glass Street doing this work.
And so if I remember, Rondell, from the first really forum-based podcast that we did where we announced the name of the building, Archway, that program in New Orleans was pivotal in your life.
Yep. It was. The program is called YAYA, which stands for Young Aspirations, Young Artists. And this year is 29 years old, the organization. And like I said, I started probably in the organization's 3rd year. I was 14. So I went to high school, a vocational high school, just around the corner from this organization. And my vocation was commercial art. And so this was a place that I went to after school, and I was able to engage in like real world art experiences that, you know, that no month was the same, which is kind of how I practice, you know, my art these days. But yeah, it was an empowerment organization. So it really gave young people an opportunity to develop a sense of self-worth and build skill sets that they can use in a practical way as an adult. And so I was very fortunate to be a part of that organization. The founder believed in taking us outside of our like small bubble, which is our neighborhood, maybe neighborhood to school. And because my school was downtown, that kind of provided me some insight outside of a neighborhood bubble. But she took us out of, you know, the city, out of the state, and out of the country. And so that was one of the most impactful benefits of being in an organization, which is still in operation, and that's awesome. but I had a chance to be a participant, serve on the board, and work on the staff for 10 years. And so the organization really changed my life and how I'm able to work as an independent artist.
I mean, that's just fascinating.
Yeah.
I don't even know what I'm doing here, sitting here. Rondell, this should be his show. You know?
And what kind of, it's an immersion of business, society, evolution. Like that's a lot of what we talk about every week anyway, is like how to get people, specifically the kids we work with, out of their own little comfort zone that might not even be that comfortable, and experience some things that can be very life-changing. And I think it's great. I would love to say that I have some level of artistic talent, but I don't. I have always been the science, mathematical guy, and I see so much the ability, the creative mind. Once you unlock that for people, I mean, just like you said, it can really culture and change the way anyone thinks. That's art, right? That's what it's like. Looking at something, seeing something, creating something changes everything in the viewpoint. That's fascinating. So seeing anyone get that opportunity, I think is great.
I'm just I mean, ever since I met you, Rondell, I just feel so blessed to know you. And I look in your eyes and I see the commitment you've made to these kids. And sometimes you see the commitment the kids don't even have in themselves. And that can be very challenging for those of us that are results oriented and have been taught results are everything.
Yeah.
And when you don't get the result, and depending on your patience level, sometimes people want that. I always tell people we turn like a ship, not like a car around here.
Yeah.
You know, our currency is time. I've had a certain business acumen that's been based on social entrepreneurship, where hopefully I don't hurt anybody while I go out and try to make some money for my family. You know, one of the things that became very relevant in my life early on was my father was a truck driver, and he was an independent-minded truck driver, but he got a hand from a guy in Irwin, Tennessee, who gave him the ability to buy a truck off of him, and he got gave him the ins and outs of trucking before deregulation happened in the 80s. And then after deregulation, trucking became kind of what the internet is today. You know, it kind of, the digital highway is a lot like the way the trucking business was back in the 70s, because it's held in a hierarchy of, you know, this many people control it and this many people beneath it are trying to make their way in life. So I had a father who was very entrepreneurial, and then I had a mother who worked at the VA when I was born, servicing Vietnam vets and certainly World War II vets with all kinds of systemic issues, from addiction to street pharmaceutical use, you know, to try to self-medicate their sorrows and their pain and their suffering. And I think art, and I think that that's what you see in a lot of people who are just on that threshold of being able to go past the lower class, which in this country typically before 1922 was everybody. I mean, there was a huge lower class in this country, and then after the wars came, certainly people had more perspective on life, and they tried to create this kind of social capitalistic, you know, through insurance. We spend a lot of time around here talking about insurance and being overly insured, which really is stagnating to a marketplace that is trying to give people the ability to climb their own economic ladder. Yeah. And tell their own story. Because what I was trying to explain to the Archway kids is that, and what certainly the fella at the rafting trip, Doug Short, said, and that was just fascinating. This guy, I don't know if you heard this story, but this bus driver that took us up to the rafting, he ran a $15 million advertising sales group at Channel 4. WDEF, I think Carlos said. Carlos Hampton's not here today, our chief and comrade.
Maybe Channel 3.
Channel 3, yeah, Channel 3. And WRCB, that's right. Yeah. And so what he said was what we were trying to tell the kids. Everybody has a story, and everybody wants to tell that story. It's why we've got, And I think depending on how genuine you can be, is how comfortable you are in the placement of your class. If you don't feel like you have any value, then you're not going to tell your story for fear somebody might not like you because your story might not be that great. And for me, my parents only argued about money. Thank God they didn't argue about, PTSD things or my mother or father cheating on one another or my grandparents being horrible people. But my father, he really suffered from a lot of abuse in his life. We touched on it the last time when he was a kid because his father only exuded his discipline and violence. And he drank a lot. Mm-hmm. And so it was like my dad was the common thread in my household that always brought us back around to, you have no idea how I grew up. But he made that generational change, so I keep saying he's my hero because he was able to make that change and see for himself what he couldn't possibly have been shown by his father, because his father was of a time that, the street pharmaceutical of that day was alcohol that wasn't able to be purchased on the street. He had to go up to the hollers of Tennessee and buy directly from the still. So God knows what was in that stuff.
Whatever that may have been.
I always tell my dad, you got to forgive him for all that, Daddy, because you never know what he was drinking.
Well, and those generational changes are really something like, it's a really interesting case study to see people who are able to make the switches, because so many aren't, right? That's what we're constantly looking at in this world, is like you're so that there's so much propensity to just do what your parents did.
Well, and here's
so
the
much.
funny
How
thing,
do you,
Andy, I'm going to interrupt you because most people aren't looking in this society. Most people are pointing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Most people in this society, that's what Donald Trump has figured out, that if you point and gawk and you laugh at people rather than with them, and you basically don't go from a place of perspective but a place of perfection, then they point rather than look. And I think there's been a lot of looking going on, and I hated to interrupt you, but that was such a profound statement, except I wanted to change one verb,
Yeah.
which is the looking part.
Yeah, looking. Yeah.
Most people point at communities like East Chattanooga and say those people are going to always be poor.
Yeah.
They're always going to be this or that.
Yeah, it has a long stain, a negative connotation, which is part of the problem. But when I started doing this work, we make assumptions. And so I'm from an underserved community in New Orleans, and I made the assumption that the level of what underserved mean in this neighborhood was at this point. But when I started to really engage and work, it's deeper than that, and it's worse than what you might think it is. And I think until you really start to get inside of the work and understand the level in which that term underserved exists, then it just almost like, for me, it's like almost on the brink of not understanding what hope is, but then still doing the work. And so for me, it's a little bit deeper. So sometimes people think I have the studio and studio everything is to make artists, but it's really not. It's just a place so that I can participate in actively supporting people's lives. They come in to the space, and there's art there, there's tools there, and equipment. But the real magic is happening when that stuff is not happening, and I'm able to sit down and have conversations about anything. Because I think that's where the real support to somebody, to how I'm impacting their life happen. And that's about cultivating relationships with people. So it's over time. Like you had mentioned about, time is what we're really talking about here. So it's not going to happen overnight. And making blind investments, meaning, I'm spending time with someone, but I might not be around to be able to see those investments that I'm making right now. So I just have to do it. And I believe that just by doing it and not worrying about what it looks like down the line is important, because I believe everybody needs to have some sense of compassion sort of given to them.
Kind of that, I always use the phrase in kind of like effective altruism, right? You're thinking altruistically outside of what is going to come back to you, maybe even in your own life, because it's for the greater good, right? And that is unfortunately a phrase, term, and action that not enough people have these days.
And that's why and that's why I also can't be worried about, like, something happening to me in the neighborhood. You know why? Because something's worse happening to everybody, in this neighborhood. So, the things that if I had to worry about, being shot one day because there's gang violence in the neighborhood, I just, I can't just, it's thinking about yourself when everybody around you is being like subjected to something much worse in the long run. So I just kind of have to ignore
Yeah, I
those
think,
things.
Michelle, you said maybe our first podcast or something. It's like, can you imagine some of the things, some of the people that we may interact with where their best day is still so much lower than our worst day?
I actually think that would have been the governor who said that.
It might have been.
It was.
Yeah, but I think it
Carlos
was
always says that. He says your worst day might be somebody's every day.
Yeah, that's
and
the
I don't
phrase.
think it's even, I think your worst day isn't even close.
Yeah.
I think
To
that
somebody
my
else's
worst day, and honestly, my life has been so blessed that what happened to me over a period of time is I realized that I was becoming one of them, where all I was looking for was to be served. Mm-hmm. And I was raised to always serve. Are you serving? Are you part of the problem, or are you establishing that without any expectation? And it's like what I tried to instill with Yolanda Putman at the paper, which is, I think people come at it from a position that government's going to solve all their problems, because I think, like a lot of things, the overcompensation of what people have been sold and then what you really look like on the back hand of that is somebody else is really benefiting from that. That's why I spend so much time talking about the NCAA, and why I think I'm so blessed. And that's what I keep trying to convey to some of the kids that I talk to, is there was no expectation in my life, even though I was an incredible athlete from Johnson City, Tennessee, that could play anything very quickly, naturally picked up on it. And one of the things that I knew is that as a woman, I was always going to be hoeing in the field. And so I better pick up the skills of how to go into that field and wheel and deal with people who have no expectation of me when I walk up to them. And I tell people this with all genuineness. And I said this to Nidra Davis's son when I had dinner with them one of the first nights we went out with RJ and Suge and Brandon, that Brandon kid. God almighty, we spent a whole time talking about how talented that kid is, and verbally. And I said to them, I said, the greatest gift in life is when nobody expects anything of you. You can pick their pocket all day long because they don't expect anything of you. And that, to me, is the resource here in East Chattanooga. Nobody expects one of these kids to go across the street and open a donut shop or a coffee shop and stand on the street corner and try to get people to come in, because they just think that life has been defeated over here. And generationally, if we can get people to support Studio Everything and Glass House Collective, and certainly Francis McDonald was one of the, really in conjunction with Glass House Collective, one of the first people to recognize opportunity over here in the building structures that are so inexpensive. And you want there to be color as part of that, Rondell. So one of the things that you hear from New Orleans after Katrina is that it was gentrified. Oh gosh, all the black people left and all the white people came in and took advantage. And nobody really wants that in East Chattanooga. But at a certain point, if people don't come on the basis of race, then hopefully they come on the basis of need. And somebody out there that hears this may start to work with one of these kids, and then at that point that kid finds out something they didn't know before, which is how I learned, just by doing. Mm-hmm. So Studio Everything is introducing people. One thing that can be had is that those kids, there's no expectation of them whatsoever, and to me that's all opportunity.
And I think it's all opportunity if they have expectation, if they see themselves, like that, if they see that they have self-worth and that they're capable of accessing that like space where people,
That,
where,
that has value, right?
yeah,
That-
because
that it
if they don't have any expectations of themselves at all, then they just like the people who don't have expectations of them. You know what I'm saying? And it's a loss. If you could kind of set a seed in the kid, however that is, because I do think it happens in time. I think most of the kids, probably some adults in this neighborhood, or most of them as well, they don't have like a true sense of self-worth. And so they always questioning everything they think of and everything somebody telling them too. I could tell some kid, you did a good job on that. I'm sincere. I'm going to say, if I say I think you did a good job, I think you did. But for them, it's like, no, it's not. And sometimes for some kids, it's exceptional. And they say, no, it's not. And you can try to put it up against something else that's out in the professional realm. Like, it's the same thing. Like, to them, still, no, it's not. And I think you have to kind of get over that hump, for them. You have to get them over that hump. And I don't.
Well, and I know as a middle class person, certainly now, I believe I'm probably upper middle class still. One of the things that's so challenging is just to know I have that inside of me, and I didn't grow up with any adversity. So I know that if I have that in me, and I had no adversity other than my own internal voice telling me I have no value, my own suppression of all of the love being poured into me generationally, and I still have that self-hate. Mainly, obviously, I've made a joke about this. The only club I didn't want to belong to was the gay club, and people are always like, they don't know how to take that. But just that one obstacle created so much self-hate in me that it began to just demoralize my soul from a valuation standpoint. And the only thing that really seemed to correct that for me was sports. And then when I waited tables, people began to ask me, who are you? Yeah. And certain times, people that I didn't even think I deserved for them to talk to me because they were so rich. How ironic is that, dude? I came from a family that was 2 months from homeless, and I started waiting on people in Riverview. I mean, I waited on Bob Corker and his wife Elizabeth when I was 19 years old, and everybody said he's a big-time developer, and he would just ask me. It's why I still smile when I see Bob. I mean, I'm critical of some of his policies because you hope that he hadn't forgotten where he came from, and when he's talking about the other opportunities that come in the marketplace via government, that he doesn't stifle all that, because sometimes government is a place that can give a helping hand where no one else is even reaching. Yeah. And to a certain degree, as much as people want to say that nothing will ever change over here, I mean, I'm here to stay, Rondell. I hope you're here to stay. And if you're not, I think there's nothing wrong with that, because there's nobody else coming over here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm committed to, I always tell people that I don't accept any form of art. It's like it's open. But I do say that mentoring is, is something that I practice as art. And so, I do it not just on Glass Street, but I do it around town. And I'm constantly trying to find ways to, not just be a practicing artist where I'm making art to sell, doing commissions, but I'm trying to also find ways to bring commissions into the studio space so kids could see me doing real-world projects, bring them into the studio space so kids could play a role in executing those commission projects, because I'm thinking about in my own past where it's not so curriculum-driven, where they need to know that they're learning this to learn that, and it's it doesn't have to be this like stare kind of model. They just need to have experiences. And so the more that I can give them experiences, it's like a trick. One day they're going to wake up and say, oh, I know how to do this, this, and this. And they're going to see how they can apply it because they've been seeing it all the while. It's just been in the background maybe. Or sometimes I can pull them in the foreground and, like I said, bring them on an installation job with me. But in time, they're going to be acquiring all these skills. And what it's making them do is think. And it's also contributing to their self-worth, because if you install something, I mean, art is powerful. You're making something from nothing.
From nothing. Dude.
From nothing. And so the more you can do that, you're just gaining it in the background, gaining self-worth in the background. And then one day you just wake up and say, oh, I can compete. Oh, I can speak about what I'm doing to somebody and not, and they're not going to think I'm dumb. And so as you, layer your worth up then I think you just kind of come out of it, as a better person. And it's a long process.
Well, and it's I think too, you made a good point earlier and kind of bridged there too, where most of the learning experiences and everything else and what you're describing that you do at Studio Everything is in like the conversations, right? It might not even be in the taking the someone with you on an installation. It might be the conversation you have in the car to the installation that triggers the little like bell or light or whatever. It goes off. Like that was the learning experience, not this other thing.
It's like when I say it, it's like it's not curriculum driven. For example, I had a friend of mine in Atlanta. I built a flower bed for her dad on the ground, and he has arthritis, and so he was just bending down, became a problem for him. So he asked me, could I come and lift it up? And so I went. I took Christian with me, and we were. He had been to Atlanta once, but not really there. And so we drove, and on the way back, I was driving on the interstate on 285, and he saw the overpass, and that was the first time for him to see like an overpass on the highway. And he was like, "What the?" And so when I saw the wonder in his eyes from that, it was about 8 o'clock, and I could have just. It was already kind of late, and it's take 2 hours to get home, but instead of me getting to 75 and heading north, I hit 75 and went south, so I can take him downtown Atlanta, so he could see skyscrapers, and it was just different. And so that's what I mean. Like it's only because the studio's there that I meet Christian, and only by way of having some sense of relationship that's been cultivating over, a year and a half, that I was able to say, can you ask your mom if you can come to Atlanta with me? And just because of that, he's able to see, a downtown of a large city, which is life-changing, in a way, deep down. So.
It's so cool because once it happens, you never get that feeling back. Yeah. You pass under those underpasses, and you lose sight of the engineering feats that have happened around you because you're just going somewhere and trying to get there and make a buck. And that was me for probably about 15 years.
Autopilot, right?
I mean, truly, I was on autopilot. I could go somewhere and I could listen to Tina Turner, Simply the Best. Mm-hmm. It almost makes me cry, dude. I get so emotional about that because I could be having the worst day. And that's how much an artist can change it. And I would put her voice on there, knowing the obstacles she had faced in her life, knowing the history of her abuse as a woman and the licensing things that happened to her. And here I'm chasing that buck, certainly trying to get there and be that entrepreneur from scratch. And I knew that those people would not buy anything from me if I flinched. And so that's truly what we're facing over here in this community. Somebody gets shot, somebody doesn't die, somebody does die. It's irrelevant. We don't hold memorials for crack dealers.
Point fingers.
We just point and we just say, that's over there. Thank goodness that does not happen in our world. And ultimately, what I began to realize is, and I wrote this on Facebook as kind of my story, which it started, Happy Anniversary to Me. Because I remember being that person who drove under like Christian and went and saw those skyscrapers. And I was like, I can do anything if people do this. But if there had not been enough money in my life and people were living a subsistence existence to not be able, the light bill was the skyscraper in most people's families in Johnson City. And I was blessed enough to have this truck driving father who'd be like, come on, kid, get in my cab. And I would go around and I'd be like, what in the world is this? And he'd be like, oh, that's nothing. Let me show you something else. And it was like a...
And what a cool, like, I go back and it's those little choices that you make, the conversations you have. I try to do the same thing with my kids. It's so easy to get on autopilot, pick them up from school, drive home, here, watch a tablet, do this. Or like, and meanwhile, there's just amazingly cool things around you, and being able to pull the car off the highway, take the blinders off, go show them something different. But that's almost the thing we got to get back and teach people. Is like, man, there's so many times, and we mentioned it, I think, last week's podcast with Doug, right? It was like we could have completely let our bus driver up there. We could have never engaged a conversation that led to him being an amazing person for the kids to listen to because he had a great story. But if we were on autopilot and just worried about our own mission, would never happen. So, like, get off of autopilot.
Without a shadow of a doubt, if that had been any other time or any other place in my life and I was chasing the dollar, I mean, I still chase the dollar. Andy works with me some in my elevator business. I'm not going to lie, but it doesn't chase me anymore. And that's the difference, is that I got back in control of who are you, where are you going, and why is it that East Chattanooga has a calling, and it has a calling because for me, I know that if I just make a difference with one kid, I have no expectation put on me to make any difference in anybody's life except the next person I meet.
I'm at a point where the try is amazing. You know, the trying to do it, make an effort is what's amazing. Because, like I said, I don't know. I'm committed to the work that I'm doing, but, we don't know how long our lifespan is. We don't know, when the seed that we're setting now is gonna blossom for someone. So you just have to be in it to give it a shot, and that's what hope is now, is that somebody who cares, doing something about it, and that in action, because you could think all day, but until you act on it, it's not real.
Well, and I think that's what's stagnating about government. I've thought for several years, I've mentioned to Andy that I might run for office. Certainly the success breeds success model here traditionally comes with some, I looked at some of the wealth of people in Congress just recently, and I realized I was wealthier than probably 50% of them. And I thought, well, if that is the regard that the electorate is doing, then maybe the people just vote for me because I have some money. But I don't want to do that. It's no more than some rich person wants them to like them because they have money. That's the funny thing, Rondell, is that talking about that as a young person, and really, I moved like 24 times between the age of, it's a running joke with all of my friends and family because they used to always pass me with a mattress on top of my car. I had a Volkswagen Golf, and I couldn't afford a moving truck, so I would put that mattress on top and get a buddy of mine, and we'd try a string, and then you would try not to go so fast that the mattress doesn't bend and ruin it. And your mother's like, I spent a fortune on that mattress. But the bottom line is, for me, is just all about out there in podcast land, are you serving others? Or are you just serving yourself? Because to me, that's when you see me and Zach and you see, what we see back in you is that you're serving. When I see,
no one's pointing fingers.
Nobody's pointing fingers. Nobody's laughing at anybody. And I think that seems to be the common denominator with really poor people and really rich people is that, and I'm making a broad stroke assumption there because that's been my experience. So if I can bring something over here that isn't labeled in Baptist or Presbyterian or Catholic, which there's nothing wrong with those labels, but maybe if I could bring some personal acumen here that just says the marketplace sometimes can repair that. Mm-hmm. Because when I became friends with somebody who was really, really rich here in town, who's dead now, one of the fascinating things about him was he had no self-esteem. And I always used to sit around and be like, I won't say his name because his family's pretty prominent here, but I used to sit around at his house and I'd be like, you just don't like yourself, do you? And he'd just drink his scotch, and he called me ammonia, and he was a very sweet man, but he was so definitely gay. But he was 60 years old, so far gone with his self-hate that it wasn't repairable even by a 23-year-old that drank scotch too. And what's so funny is the assumptions in my business world, and I've been told this like 3 times, is he was the guy that gave me the money to start my business. And it wasn't him at all. It was a fellow from Mississippi from the Delta who grew up poor too, and he had made his life in architecture, and he wrote me a $35,000 check and said, "There you go, kid. See what you can do."
That's awesome.
And basically just said, "You got to pay me some back on what you make," and I did for 5 years. And everybody assumes it's the rich dude that helped me. How funny is that?
I mean, that's assumptions. I mean, that's what I was saying. Like, even when people reflect on what they think this neighborhood is about and who the people who live here are, what they're about, it's all assumptions until you come down here, walk down, and not just spend a day or a month or even a year. You have to be here and meet people face to face with zero judgment, and learn who they are and let them learn who you are. Engage, and then you could, formulate real ideas that's based on your own truths with relationships and not just blanket assumptions. And I think that's part of the problem.
I think that's why the marketplace over here, Rondell, if we can get people to understand that, I mean, we're sitting here and there's probably been 2,000 cars pass by us while we've been sitting here for an hour.
This street is amazing.
I mean,
it's just an amazing place.
and nobody stops. And all I see is money over here growing. Like, I just see it, and yet I can't be a lone business person over here. I mean,
and they want to eat a donut.
I mean, the reality is, who doesn't want to eat a donut?
Yep.
And the fact of the matter, Rondell, is that this is really the crux of it to me. It's white and black people not seeing opportunity over here. Mm-hmm. Because when I was here, the very first time I started mentoring kids 3 years ago, I tell people this story with no animosity towards anybody's color or age or anything, because it's based on goodwill, the story I'm about ready to tell you, which is I was here 2 Saturday mornings within a month of each other, parked, waiting for a kid to get in my truck to go mow some lawns with me, and 2 people who are black stopped and said, "Girl, you need to get out of this neighborhood. This is a bad neighborhood." And I thought to myself, if someone who is supposed to feel comfortable here, if that's the preconceived notion, right?
Golly.
Is that if you can enter places because of your color, then you automatically feel safe. And if that is the preconceived notion and someone is telling me of that color it's not safe, then how much of an impact can someone and I think that's truly what a lot of people who can't identify themselves anymore as poor, because that's distasteful. Oh, yeah. Nobody wants to be poor, right? But yet, how funny was it that all Jesus talked about is serving the poor? And I always swing it back, the footsteps of Jesus. I don't know why. It's maybe my Christ-haunted grandmother. I don't know, Rondell, but I just think of those women, and that happened to me not once, not twice, but 3 times over here. Out of goodwill, people were telling me to leave. You're not safe.
I mean, that's part of the problem, but it's about self-reflection again, like not seeing worth in yourself or not seeing worth in your community. And that's what's said. I mean, I had a colleague working with me in the neighborhood 3 years ago, and it got dark, and we were talking about the neighborhood, and he was like, he's a white guy. He's like, I can't walk out there in the neighborhood right now, but you can. And I was like, I think you can. And nothing, I think you can without anything happening to you. Yeah, some days you could come down here and walk down the wrong street and maybe somebody might, mess with you. Some days you can come down here and walk all around and nothing happens to you. I think there's majority good people in the neighborhood and people that actually, that's making it challenging with regards to negativity. I've been here. I mean, and I know, and I do believe this, that artists get a pass. And so, that's a part of me being able to do the work that I'm doing is I'm an artist. I can look weird. I can do weird things. I can say things that's not of the norm and just get a pass. So he's an artist. He's a little cuckoo. Or they can say, I get what you're saying, but you're an artist. I get a pass. And
So
so,
have you had?
Are you
Has that
getting a
conversation
pass or are
come
you
up?
being dismissed? Because I think that there's a fine line between getting a pass
Both.
and just being dismissed.
a little bit of both. But it's the same result is that I'm able to be present without, like, suffering consequences that other people may or may not. Yeah.
That's awesome. I would have never thought that like you have an art pass.
Yeah, it's
I'm the artist.
It goes everywhere. I mean, I can walk into a board meeting with holes in my pants and paint on my shoulder and my neck, and not, get people to say I can't respect this guy because he got holes in his pants and paint in it because I'm an artist. Oh, he's an artist. It's like
Never
that kind
mind.
of
I want to
thing.
be an
Well,
artist.
what's so funny about that is that's the same premise that I keep saying about the expectation of these kids. There is no expectation. And maybe what you're saying is there's really no expectation of an artist. If you're labeled that gives you the freedom to be whoever you want to be. I see the same thing when you grow up poor or a female or gay or black or Mexican or anything. And to a certain degree, the funny thing about it is I see that with white kids of privilege. Because everybody expects so much out of these kids. And the kids that I've met who have been privileged, that burden has stagnated them. The analysis paralysis of not making a mistake. I got a guy that inherited, he's a buddy of mine, and I promise you, if he ever listens to this, he'll know I'm talking to him. But he knows. He inherited a bunch of money from his grandfather, Coca-Cola stock. And he doesn't do anything with that money for fear of failure. And it paralyzes him. Like, I see the fear. He doesn't ask the woman he's been dating for 4 years to marry her because he's never certain that she's seen him because of his money or not. He buys these properties, and he basically gets, you can see the anxiety within him of the pressure that was put on him. And I thank the heavens that I didn't inherit Coca-Cola stock. Because if that's what comes along with that, you can keep that.
Yeah, I mean, monetary work is different than self work. It's a different kind of scale, and you can be, the richest person on the planet, but if someone hasn't, like, sort of provided you with a sense of what compassion means and love, then you have no self work. And so, and that can be the same reality for someone who's poor. There's some poor people who are rich in self work. They're rich in self worth, and so they do fine in life.
My mama's, the funny thing about my upbringing is because my parents were so young. My mother, I always talk about I'm a chronological oddity. My mother gave birth to 2 children at the age of 20. I mean, she didn't turn an age. Her birthday is June 18th. She was pregnant with my brother, gave birth to him on July 6th, got pregnant with me again, and gave birth to me on May 23rd. And I'm so proud of that story because I think that's a chronological feat.
It's pretty impressive.
I mean, she didn't even plan it, or my father didn't plan it that way. And I think the only reason that I'm not judged for that is because my parents have stayed married and they've towed the line of lower middle class. 2 months to homeless. So nobody judges them because they're doing, but if my father had gotten an inkling of his birth and it had taken over because his mental capacity couldn't just compartmentalize it, and the fact that I know my father witnessed horrific things. I've been told about my grandfather would get drunk and beat the living crap out of my mama. And she would just endure it. And as she endured it, she would protect her kids from it. And so what my dad always said is that I owe that to my mother not to be owned by that memory. Because she was strong enough to take the beating and be thrown out of their trailer or out of their house. And that was so impactful for me that if I don't come over here and genuinely tell that story for fear that violence is a proponent of everything. I see violence around us all the time. And I don't know why people can't understand that it's the love that's going to protect us. And when people buy into that, then we've lost. And so I just want to come over here and try to, Marquise, I took him to the boathouse to get happy hour wings because they're $5 and they're like the best wings ever. And he had some money that he had from the contest, and I was like, buddy, do you want to go? And he was like, yeah, buddy. And we started talking about going to McDonald's, and he said, I really like wings. I said, well, I only go to local places because those places have economic ladders for people. And he was like, what does that mean? And I was like, that means that when you pull up to McDonald's, even if somebody's nice to you, you're not going to give them $5 extra because they gave you better service. Because the establishment of McDonald's is you're basically only paying for the French fry. And we've marketed it in such a way that you don't have to pay the smiling face, anything else, so you can keep your money. But it keeps everybody within that community of thought has no economic ladder versus an entrepreneurship when you walk up to a table and you actually say to someone, tell me your story, I'm going to tell you mine. And that's how that happened for me, Rondell. That's how I got out of lower middle class is, like I said, people that I thought had tremendous value. And then later on, the more I was around them, I realized they didn't have any more value than I did.
Yeah. And that's the importance of sort of bringing a kid from, this sort of this island and bubble to an actual, sort of lifestyle where they are engaging with other people, because then they could look at other people when they meet them and say, why should I give you more work than myself? And you only could make that statement if you're around other people. You just can't do it when you're in a bubble.
So maybe we should have a barbecue here. I've been thinking about having a neighborhood barbecue. Sponsoring a barbecue and inviting people over and maybe seeing if I don't know any local musicians who might want to play, but
I bet we can find some of those.
Maybe mow the lawn one more time before the grass completely dries and
roll up a big smoker.
That would be great. I actually would love for the kids to serve too, so that way they could make some money, because again, if they serve, then there's nothing wrong with black kids servicing you, right? Because there seems to be this stigma, and when I went around the South and smaller communities outside of Memphis, certainly outside of New Orleans, and outside of Atlanta, definitely, it always seemed like I looked around local restaurants and there were never any black people serving. And I always think of that as the genesis of entrepreneurship.
I'm from New Orleans, so it's mixed up. You have a little bit of both.
But here's the funny thing, Rondell. When I was mentoring my kids at the Urban Lawn, and my friends would come over to drink cold beer, I always told the kids to come over that my friends would tip them, and if they served them and ran and got them tacos next door at the Mexican restaurant, La Tena. And you know what my friend said? My white, upper middle class friends would say, buddy, this is horrible that you have black kids. Do you know what this looks like? And I was like, what does it look like?
It goes both ways. It depends on how you look at it. When you said about, I was thinking reverse. When you said maybe you can have a barbecue and have some kids in the neighborhood serve, I was thinking, what about reverse? What about having a barbecue and have the kids sitting down and some people who privilege serve?
Yeah.
Like flipping it. You could do both.
We
It's funny,
could
I
do
had
that.
this- I had this
Be
con-
interesting to see how many people would show up for the privileged people serving the underserved people versus the underserved serving the privileged.
And maybe they don't know when they show up, and then you helping me serve. Or what about intimate dinners where it's like a young person in their family and a privileged person in their family, but just real small, meet up, not just one time, but have like a twice a month for a year and see what happens. They can meet each other. Because then I think that they'll meet each other in an intimate space and it'd be awkward at first, but they'll get to know each other, and like know a little bit more about why this person act this way or act that way, and maybe after a year they'd be a little bit more bonded than not. But it's just...
Well, it's like what reality TV becomes just reality community, right? We can do it any way you want. And it would be fascinating to see if in through that, because as I said, I've said this like 100 times, Rondell, my grandmother, the Christ-haunted one, who always talked about Jesus to me, she always said, you feed people, they start to look like you. And so I think that if we do that here, anything's possible as long as people show up. But if it's just us standing here talking,
Well, and so it's funny we bring this up because I was having this thought process after we had a business lunch yesterday, and thinking about the whole branding, marketing, and influence that sales can have, right? That a salesman can have, and that all it brought me back to thinking about a server, right? That's your ladder, right? You started at
that's
serving.
definitely my economic ladder.
And how cool would it be to run a little test because you have some good connections with some of these restaurants in town, where you take a really good server, don't really care who they are, what they look like, and we take maybe some kids there, and here's my premise is, can that server convince the kids to order what he wants them to order without them knowing? This is the special. Let me tell
I
you
could
about
do
this.
that.
I know you can.
You know,
And
Carlos,
that's the whole thing.
The governor and I keep having this competitive analysis that who would make the most amount of tips.
But it's such an easy serving in that, right? When you have a good server and they tell you about, maybe it's a special, maybe it's not, whatever they want you to buy, they can get you to buy.
Well, that's what people keep saying right now is just tell people what to do. But because I believe that people do what they want to do, and it becomes very frustrating if you reach out to your inner circle too many times, then the expectation of your inner circle is that that's the only people you're reaching, and that's truly the definition of preaching to a choir.
Yeah.
Are we, I mean, I didn't know Rondell before I met him when I walked over here, but I walked over here again with no expectations, so it was a blessing that I met Rondell. I didn't know Teal until I walked over here with one of my buddies that I was mentoring individually, because I wasn't comfortable being out in the public because I've always been in the private. I have made my steps out of and anything that I've done out of nickels and dimes, and I've never touted anything more than, I'm here to sell you a home elevator. Here's how great it is. Here's what's not great about it. Here's what a pain in the ass it is. And through the conveyance of all of that, the person writing me the check trusted me. Now, I don't know if anybody will ever write Studio Everything a check. I certainly will. I will certainly write Glass House Collective a check. But I think at the bottom line of what you're saying, Andy, is we could do all kinds of things if we just had the availability of money and servers, because then you have service being had and you have service being received. And in that marketplace of that happening, there is a communication that's happening between two people who may not reach across that aisle.
Well, and what my thought in that kind of idea is, you know, you've talked to a lot of these kids about how they're being branded by media, by, you know, this video or that show, whatever. You're seeing, you're wanting, you're buying, and you don't even know that you're being, you know, your pockets are being
those
picked.
Guys don't even know their
Right.
pockets
But
are being picked.
And so it's great to have that conversation, and you know, I've even seen the kids like, oh yeah, it makes good sense. But then to actually have it happen right then, in person, with something as simple as food, and you're like, shoot.
Yeah.
Like, because afterwards you're like, hey, guess what? We wanted you to buy that because it was going bad, right? Like, it was whatever, right? The house wanted you to do that, and you did. Here's why. Here's how you do it. Here's how you need to know these things. That was the genesis of that thought. The thought process.
I mean, sometimes, like I said earlier, you can have like a curriculum model with intention, or you can just make the moment happen. And I think one day you wake up and realize, oh, I can do this, this, and this. Oh, I can do this, this, and this because I've done it before. You know, like sometimes at the beginning it's hard. I mean, I bumped into Sugar yesterday, you know, and there was a time where, you know, 3 months where every day I worked with her. And then one day I said, you know, I'm about to get some grant money. I'll hire you for 10 hours a week. And she disappeared. you know, and it was just, I didn't know enough to know at the time where I was just when I was making it official, I was just putting too much on, you know. For her, official was like, no. But just
You never have
chillax
to
was
worry
cool.
about that kid, dude. She's going to put so much pressure on herself that what I told her about Jane Austen, I met a rich kid at Maker Patton not too long ago, and hopefully she'll listen to this too, because I made the same comment to her that I made to Suge, which is I said, one of my favorite lines in life is what Jane Austen wrote, which is pride a fault or a virtue? And it can be both. But what I said to Suge is you're never going to let anybody get one over on you, and that's going to be your biggest concern, because you're a hammer and everybody's a nail, and you got so much to give if you can just open up to people. And you got to forgive whoever hurt you. That's the only way you're going to get there. And that's truly what my father has never done for himself, but through the forgiveness of what happened and what my grandfather did to my grandmother, he forgave my grandmother too for not leaving, because I think that was a big part of it, that she stayed putting up with all those beatings. But it's like I told Daddy, who in their right mind in 1952 was going to leave the company that was keeping the light bill on until she began to work in a factory herself in Gray, Tennessee, that gave her the ability to keep that light bill on whether her husband stayed around or not. That empowerment of marketplace, that's what I've always gone back to. And I think with Suge, what's interesting about her is that if she can forgive what has been done to her in any capacity, whether that is even a wrong look, that kid could write her own check.
Yeah.
Especially given the volume of love occurring around her with you. And certainly I recognized that early on with her.
I mean, people in very natural ways love her. I was out somewhere at Tech Town, and this lady came up to me, and I was like, yeah, you know, hey, I'm Rondell. And she was like, oh, you're Rondell. She said, I have a kid I've been working with at the school I work at, and she's very fond of you. She always talking about you. And she said, yeah, Shiggy. And I was like, yep. So then this woman came in the studio about 4 months ago, and she was the Girls Inc. representative at Brainerd. And she was like, I'm looking for somebody named Ronald. And I was like, well, there's nobody here. I'm Rondell. She was like, maybe she said, I have a student, and I'm just trying to find out how to get through to her. And I looked at her and I said, Shuggy. And that's just something, she have you know, it's just natural where people see, you know, her talent and understand that it's in volumes, and they don't understand why she doesn't like let it out. And so they go seeking how to help her get it out on their own. And that's the kind of power she had, but she just don't see it.
She just doesn't see it because, again, I believe that is a defensive mechanism. And I had that to a certain degree a little bit in life, but nowhere near what I think she has growing up in an understanding that you can be anything you want to be as long as you get out of your own way. And that was my biggest issue. I got a girl right now, grew up on Lookout Mountain. Her mother is a drug addict. And I don't think that she'll mind me talking about this because same thing. Everybody who ran into her was like, oh my God, I met someone the other day that knows you. And I was like, yeah, that's the kid I've been mentoring. And they're like, yeah, what? She's fantastic. She's incredibly smart. I'm like, yeah, but she hadn't gotten out of her own way yet. Because she still to this day harbors this generational correctness or correctivity that happens, that's the only way she's going to see value is by correcting what was done to her, by letting it not continue to be done to her. And that vulnerability can be used in many different ways once you forgive the person that you weren't supposed to have happen to you did that to you. Like what I said about my dad and his father doing that it always, like my brother always says, my father's a sad clown.
Yeah.
Because he's just always like trying to make jokes because that's his deflectionary tactic. And that Suge kid I mean, she doesn't miss a beat. It doesn't matter if she's looking at you or not. She knows what's going on.
Oh, yeah.
And, I mean, she opened up to me when I told the baloney story, which I loved. And it's just, will she open up to other people around her? Will she open up to people that she may not see value because they may not be living in the extremes that she's used to?
Yeah, and I mean, from my experience, I think she doesn't have a problem opening up to people, but I think it's when that person respond with, like, I believe in you, so I'm going to do this to show that I do, then she put up a wall.
Right, because I think that I feel this too, that once somebody puts an expectation on you and you really care about them, then her biggest obstacle is going to be she's going to disappoint you. But what she doesn't realize is we have all disappointed a lot of people that love us. And it's the power of forgiveness that brings us continuing to try.
And that's one thing that, and all the kids I work with and all the different ways that I work with young people, there's a common thread with regards connects to this self-worth, which is they can see the outcome because they're smart enough to see it, but the work to get there is hard for them. Like if they say, I want to draw an eye, and I say, okay, let's sit down and start with this, and they're like, no, I don't like what I'm doing. They just so judgmental about just even putting a tiny mark on a page, and I'm like, you're sketching. It doesn't matter. It's just you playing around. You're gonna mess it up 10,000 times, So embrace that part of it, but it's hard for them to do that because they're in a environment that doesn't like that. It doesn't accept that to make one mistake is wrong.
Well, and here's the funny thing, Rondell. I have thought this for years, and you just summed it up, which is that I think most people who are looked upon as a pollution to our society, certainly poverty is looked on as a pollution, right? And the tariffs and the sustainability and all the things that people talk about when they come into a world of correction of that pollution that may be generational. It may be simply things that people couldn't feel like they can control. One of the things that you just established is exactly what we talk about when we see kids like Shug or possibly anybody else that comes in our world, is they are so self-critical that it is paralyzing to them. Yep. And the fact that our society now, in my opinion, monetizes that paralyzation, that paralysis, by basically creating a world of perfection, and then that's all those kids want to attain. And through that effort, they lose sight of the fact that it's not about the completion of something, it's about how you played the game.
The process.
I'm never going to win. I know at some point I will be on the public dole, which is why I still pay self-employment tax and all the things that I do, because I play the game as best as I can so that when I go to bed at night, I know that I hurt far fewer people than other people who are trying to get up on an economic ladder, that it was the love of money is the root of all evil that was taught to me. It was not money is the root of all evil. It was the love of money that was the problem. And because that's what I think you happen to see whenever you go into a impoverished community where you don't see economic ladders. The average people in this community in East Chattanooga, $13,000 a year. Somebody might argue there are statistics that people don't see, which is people not participating in the public marketplace that we all see. They're participating in a street pharmaceutical private marketplace or whatever you think. But the reality is, if it has been proven time and time again, if you have love for money and material possession, it will own you. And so one of the things that I think is a fascinating thing when you talk about Shug and some of these other kids is maybe through this process, people who have that instant defensive mechanism where if I don't commit, then I don't have to let you down. And that in its own way is self-deprecating.
Yes, it is. Very.
And so I can't go on and on and on enough about how fantastic I think Studio Everything is, and how just in that process, you're allowing a kid to maybe get over that obstacle through art of life isn't perfect. And if you just give it your best effort, that may be someone else's worst effort, but it doesn't matter as long as you know you gave it your best effort. But criticizing what you did is something I managed to get over early on in my life. And it has been to my absolute benefit to not look in the mirror. I know there is a reason why that front windshield is 1,000 times bigger than that rearview mirror. And I think that's what you're facing over here is people and if you can begin to turn that message, there is ultimate opportunity when people expect nothing from you. And then
It's
you
a good
just,
perspective.
you got to show them the way. And I think you're doing that. And I hope Andy and I, and certainly the governor who's not here, Carlos Hampton, we all feel like if we just come over here and participate, then through that participation, maybe something organically will happen with, I'm not having to answer to a board.
Yeah, me neither. And that's the good thing about, like I said, I see this as a art project. So I need to be the one, every night I go home and say, okay, this will happen today. I could do this different tomorrow. And I think having that autonomy is because it's not an organization. I don't have a board. I don't have people to answer to. I'm answering to my own mind or I'm answering to the people, the residents. They're challenging me. I'm, for sure challenging them. And it's a relationship. And so, it's changing all the time. And
it's such a good thought to just like you mentioned with our, you might sketch it wrong 10,000 times. And
that's all
but it's
right.
the next time, you got it, right?
And that's all right.
Yeah, it's great.
Resilience is,
Guess and test, right?
Guess and test.
That's what artists, you have to be resilient. And there's a lot of ideas you have and, you don't pursue them. There's a lot of things that cross your mind. So it doesn't have to be, hitting that home run every time you take a swing. And so that's just a part about being an artist. And so for the kids, if they can, but I think it's something simple though. If you could drill a screw in something, for the kid to come in the studio, no one wants to let them use a drill anywhere in the rest of their life. But they come in the studio, and they could be 4 years old, and I could say, give it a try. Take the screw, put it on the thing, put it in. That's how you do it. Put it in reverse, take it out. So for that kid, it's like, one, he let me do something I couldn't do. There's a little trust building there. Two is I did something an adult. Some adults don't know how to do. So it's a little bit of boost in self-esteem. And then as they come in and do that more and more and more, it becomes better at it. And then they can see their power and start thinking about the next thing.
That's cool. So as
I
we're
think we're wrapping
as
up.
we're wrapping
I
up,
think Mr. DJ just gave us the hour. Now we're probably an hour and 9 minutes. I think the next step, Andy, here is barbecue. You want to put a barbecue together?
Absolutely. Well, and while we have Rondell here, maybe you can tell us a little bit about where people can find out about Studio Everything, where they can find you on the web, all of our tens of thousands of millions of listeners.
Yeah, I have a Facebook and Studio Everything Facebook page. I think that's the best way to, sort of get connected with what we've done in the past. You can just, kind of dive through the years and see some of the things that we've been able to accomplish. There's little personal stories that I choose to put on there and maybe some things that kids make. And that's where the things in the future are going to be on the Facebook page.
Could you, should we basically say, could you use any extra equipment? At some point, we might want to, most people reach out to those institutional. I think individuals make all the difference. If we can get the right person to hear this and they have a wood shop or something that they can donate. Do you need any?
I think, there's resources and they always change. Any kind of, I have friends that are architects and artists. They might call me and say, I got some screws. You need some, like loose screws. I say, bring them on. The most important thing that, that I've said in the past that people should bring themselves. Like come down, meet the kids for whatever reason, build a relationship, and that turns into something, and that's the best resource.
Awesome.
People shaking hands with other people certainly feel right to me. So, all right, guys, we're closing shop. Thanks to Christian and Asia for introducing us. Maybe we'll do that every time now. I thought that was fun.
Yeah.
All right.
Good stuff. All right.
Rondell, thanks for joining us, buddy.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.